everyone, my name is Angie.
And I'm Kevin.
And we work at SDR. Today's video includes study tips for you.
Yeah, if you want any more information about what we talk about today, check the link in the description. Thanks.
So the first tip I'm going to share with you today is about spacing. An important thing to remember is that you want to start studying ahead of the exam and not wait until the last minute. This is probably something you've heard a lot before, and there's a reason for it. It's because that's how our brain works. We want to be able to learn something, forget it, relearn it, and forget it until we really can retain it. So you want to start studying at least 4 days in advance, and you want to break it up into different chunks. So one thing to remember is that you're not necessarily studying more than you wanted to, you're just breaking it up into different chunks. There's no detriment in you studying a little bit earlier. You're still going to remember what you're going to remember and forget what you're going to forget.
So the next skill is called interweaving. So this happens a lot when we have multiple exams in a week. You'll kind of get into a mode where you're like, oh, I'm studying this subject, I'm studying this subject, I'm studying this subject. And then when that test is over, it's, okay, now I'm onto this one, now I'm onto this one, now I'm onto this one. And then when that one's over, you finally move on to, okay, now I'm doing this one, now I'm doing this one, now I'm doing this one. So interweaving is the idea that you're going to interweave your studying the same way you would weave a basket. So you study the first subject, and then you study the second one, then you study the third one, you go back to the first subject, back to the second, and then back to the third. So you're alternating what subject you're studying. So what a lot of people will say is, but let's say I'm studying bio first, and then I switch to math. Won't I forget what I was studying in bio? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And that's great, because the way we learn is by learning, forgetting, relearning, forgetting, and each time you're building on what you previously knew. So interweaving is a great way of kind of forcing out what you don't know and letting what you really do know stay behind.
So the next tip is about testing. The best way to know what you're actually learning is by testing yourself. An important thing to keep in mind is that you want to replicate your testing situations. So put away your phone, take a long period of time to test yourself, and really know what it is that you already learned and what you still need to know. So testing yourself is really important because it really highlights the gaps in your knowledge. Sometimes we're a little bit overconfident about what we know and don't study the things that we still need to learn. So testing yourself can really help in that area. If you want any tips on how to create questions or tests to test your knowledge, please click on the link below.
So the last tip we're going to talk about is called overlearning. It's my favorite. I hope you like it. You'll notice that we're only going over 4 study tips today, and the reason for that is that if you were to Google study tips, you'd find millions of results and it'd be super overwhelming. So if you just remember these 4, you should be good to go. So let's talk about your brain. I probably should have mentioned this when we recorded this clip, but overlearning is the idea that you don't just learn something, you will learn it and then you continue to study it to the point that it becomes overlearned. We'll talk a little bit more about what that would look like, but that's the idea. You don't just know it, you know it and you continue to study it. So to illustrate the concept of overlearning, I want you to think about the first time you ever drove a car. So many of you have probably driven for a couple of years, and if you think back, what were some things that were different the first time you drove a car versus now if you were to drive a car? So often what students will say is they remember that the gas pedal felt really strange the first time. They didn't realize how powerful the car was going to be. Some students talk about how they were really intentional about checking their mirrors, whereas now they just kind of do it without thinking about it. Some students talk about how they learned to drive on a manual shift and it was impossible to do all those things at once, and now it's second nature. They can eat, they can talk on the phone, which is unsafe, but they can do it while driving. So the idea of overlearning is that things are so automatic, they happen without you thinking about them, to the point that they don't take up any of this limited working memory. So if we go back to the driving example, for someone who's a novice driver, This limited space is filled by things like mirrors. Where am I in the lane? What's my speed? How hard should I hit the gas? I've had some students say, I didn't realize that I didn't use one foot for each pedal, right? So what foot do I use? All these things take up that limited cognitive space, which leaves less space for things like actually driving. So for those of you who are now drivers and have driven for a couple of years, I imagine that all of these things are completely automatic, which means they're not taking up any space in your working memory. So if I were to ask you to do a simple math problem while driving, say, what's 6 times 7, you'd be able to do it. Whereas when you were a novice driver, there wasn't enough cognitive space for you to be able to do that without really freaking out. So how does this apply to your college classes now? You know, you're probably not driving as any element of an exam. The idea of overlearning is that the foundational knowledge of any course needs to be automatic to a point that you don't even think about it. It's completely not touching this limited working memory. So let's say you're taking a physics class and you're asked to apply Newton's first law. A novice learner who has not overlearned those laws is going to have that come into their working memory. So they're going to be thinking, oh my gosh, which one was Newton's first law? Oh God, do I know it? Is this the right one? How would I apply it? Whereas someone who's overlearned it, it's not even going to touch that space, which leaves all that working memory, which remember is limited, to actually apply the ideas. So overlearning simply is the idea that foundational knowledge is so well known that it's automatic and doesn't take up any cognitive space, leaving more cognitive space for the higher order, more difficult questions that you're likely going to encounter on an exam.
Thanks for watching. We hope those tips were helpful. We want to just remind you that when you start using these tips, it might become a little bit harder for you to study just because you're doing it in a different way.
Yeah, some students actually see an initial dip in grades when they first try these, but over time you'll see your grades come back up.
And remember, just rereading isn't effective. This is about long-term learning. So you might be able to use your time more wisely by testing yourself or doing practice problems.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, nothing really beats hard work and practice. So make sure that you're giving yourself sufficient time to study, because that's really going to make a big difference on how you do on an exam.
Absolutely. And if you want any of the documents with the tips that we shared with you today, just click on the link below.
Thanks.